Hello, everyone, and welcome to South Bay UX. This is not our November meetup. I just realized I forgot to change the title. This is our December meetup. You are in the right place. This is meetup number 31, and usually when we are in person, this is when we clap and cheer because meetups are fun to plan and even more fun to attend. Usually when we are in person, we meet at the Google Cloud campus in Sunnyvale, California. However, a little thing called coronavirus forced us to stay home, and here we are broadcasting live from our homes. And so this is your meetup. Even if we're at home, even if we're not in person, we still need help with this meetup. And so if you are interested in volunteering, please do so. We're always looking for speakers. We're looking for people that have different ideas about how to run this as a live stream or that want to participate in the online community. So please reach out to us with the form that I will show in a minute. Thank you to our awesome sponsors. We have Tech Systems, which when we're in person provides us food and drink for the event. We have Sketch that facilitates the meetup itself and provides us with licenses for giveaway. And Google, which typically provides a fun place to shelter while we meet up, so we're not outside or at home all the time. And so I want you to join us on Slack now. If you are not a member of our Slack channel, please take this opportunity to copy down that URL and join. It is case sensitive. On Slack, we'll announce the meetup. Again, we'll talk about different details and post videos afterwards. And it's a good place to get in touch with other people that are also working in the South Bay. Speaking of volunteering, if we would like to volunteer, we have another form here. It is also case sensitive. This one's lowercase, just to be more confusing. And we are, again, looking for speakers. We're looking for people that want to foster an online community, and we would love for you to join us on this fun journey. I want to give a shout out to Sketch, who has been sponsoring us from the beginning. And as part of that sponsorship, they provide a raffle for 4 licenses. And typically we have a drum roll when we're in person and we dramatically pull things out of a bucket. But instead, we are using a JavaScript randomizer and showing a banner. So Mel, Christian, B, and Mahmoud, you guys are the winners. And I will get in touch with you via meetup.com to help you get your license. Oops. And now I'd like to bring on Paul Stryker from Tech Systems to run our Who's Hiring section. Paul, take it away.
Hi, everyone. As Aaron mentioned, Tech Systems is one of the sponsors for this meetup. We're a creative services and recruitment agency. So we have a team of specialized recruiters within the product design space that would love to connect with you all just to give you an idea of what's happening in the job market. So if you'd like to be put in touch with one of our recruiters, please sign up at the Google form that Aaron will send out the link to, and is also available in our recruiting section of our Slack group. So if you are also hiring, please feel free to comment into the chat, and then folks can respond there.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'll give it a couple of seconds for people to throw any hiring opportunities into the chat. Do reach out on Slack. That's probably the best way to get in touch with people these days. And definitely fill out that form if you're interested in learning more about Tech Systems. Thank you very much, Paul. All right, and next I'm going to bring on Kelly Thompson to talk about design at Google. Take it away, Kelly.
Hi, thanks, Aaron, for having me. My name is Kelly, and I am representing UX staffing, and that means that we work on staffing roles across North America at Google, and that includes design, research, UX engineering, and UX writing. And so I'm really excited to be here at your virtual meetup, number 31. And I've shared, or Aaron will be sharing a link that if you're interested in Google and want to understand how to better navigate the hiring and interview process, we have quarterly roughly quarterly workshops where we invite the external community in, and we sort of try to give you the inside track on being successful interviewing at Google. So if you're interested, please sign up, and we'll be in touch with details for our upcoming event. Thank you, and enjoy number 31. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, Kelly. Okay. And next, oh, I'm not showing my screen. Give me 1 second. Next month, we have Kristen Couture, who is a senior design manager at Samsung, and she's going to talk about designing for the 10-foot experience. That's television, that's conference systems, anything where the screen is far away from the user. And it's going to be a really interesting talk that I'm looking forward to. And now I want to welcome Yvonne Gando. She is a UX writing manager at Google, and she's going to share how UXW can help you build better products. And I'll bring on Yvonne here.
Hello, thanks so much. Thank you very much. I'm super excited to be here. Hello, everyone. So today, I'd love to talk to you about some of the lessons I've learned across UX writing for several industries and verticals. And some of these lessons I've learned the hard way. So I wanted to be able to package them up and really try to figure out a way where you could maybe bring these home to apply to your own practice. And so part of this will be kind of a rapid fire case study. So please feel free to pop questions into the chat. Or I'm sure Aaron won't mind if you want to just go ahead and shout out certain questions or whatnot. So I would like to start with this quote. So I love this quote because it both reminds us and it warns us of the power of language. Words are free. It's how you use them that may cost you. So it's true that when you talk to your user through your UI, which is what UX writing is all about, it's easy to win your users over if you know the right type of language and the tone and what your audience cares about, but it's just as easy to lose them. So today we're going to be talking about how you might think about really getting to know your users a little better and really engaging them end to end as you kind of meet them for the first time and also carry them through this journey, through the product experiences that you'll build. But first, a pop quiz. So let's imagine that your best friend just joined a video calling app. And it's a video, it's essentially the FaceTime equivalent, but it's on Android and it's called Google Duo. And so say you get this message in your, via a text message where your friend is trying to invite you to install this app and use it so that you can start video chatting with each other. So there's several ways that someone can invite you to the chat, right? So I want you to kind of dig in and take a look at these variations. There's 5 here. They're essentially trying to say the same thing, but in different ways, and there's different nuances that we'll talk through later. A is, I tried calling you on Duo, but you're not on it yet. B, get Duo so we can video chat on Android and iOS anytime. C, I just heard about Google Duo for video chatting. Let's try it. D, let's video chat on Duo. And E, add me on Duo so we can video chat. So I want to ask you to take another quick look at this. And I'd love for folks to share which of the versions would most likely compel you to download the app and start using it. And I'm also going to pick on Aaron and see what Aaron's top pick would be, if I may.
I would go with B because to me, that tells you what the product does and when we can use it.
Awesome. Any other guesses out there? Okay, so let me go ahead and move on. So we actually ran this as an experiment when we first launched Duo. And so just to give you an idea of the N, it was this is really early post-launch, and it was about 2 weeks into the launch. We wanted to kind of get an understanding of our user base in terms of what are the types of nuances in language and tone that we could play around with to understand kind of this, what would be more engaging and compelling to our users, especially because this was, again, very early stages, and we wanted to understand what type of text and tone would resonate with them. So the percent that you see on the right-hand side would indicate the number of registrations, not just installs. So these folks have installed the app as well as registered for the actual app itself. And this was, again, about 2 weeks right after launch. And just to get an idea of the scale, E, which was the popular one by far, 22.4% comprised of 875,000 installs across the experiments. And so this is just a really quick example of how the nuances and tone and the language does matter. And so if we look at A, for instance, I tried calling you on Duo, but you're not on it yet. This appeals to sort of this FOMO angle, this idea that, you know, you're invited to this popular party and you're trying to get folks in. And it's like kind of this social proof that you're trying to appeal to. B, which is what Aaron had mentioned, was an interesting one because while it was still kind of a little bit more popular than the control, it actually was one that the product managers favored because it actually explicitly communicated the dual or the cross-platform capabilities. So being able to chat on Android and iOS. However, E was by far the most compelling one. And if we take a deeper look at it, if you think about this idea of interaction and this idea of being in a social space, ad is one of the terms that we are all very familiar with when it comes to, you know, social platforms, for instance, Facebook. When you add someone to your network, then you can easily share among them. So this idea of really thinking about these offline spaces that we inhabit and then leveraging that type of language that you use in everyday speech. And then trying to see where are the opportunities that you could present this in your UI or in your product so that you kind of get to the heart of how people actually talk in real life. And so another point I'd love to make here is just that when we do look at E, you tend to see that the product of Duo recedes and the people, so the person who's sharing the invite and the person who's accepting the invite, kind of come to the fore. And this interaction then is the main focus of the communication. So that's really one of the key elements in really thinking about users first, really figuring out like the best way to communicate the value of your product in the most immediate and concise fashion. And then so since you have a little bit of a flavor of an example of UX writing and how it can be done well, I want to go ahead and dive deeper into the definition of UX writing as I have observed it being a student of this craft for the last 2 decades or so. So I like to see UX writing as the intersection of these 3 critical components. So words, empathy, and strategy. So when I talk about words, I'm really thinking about the craft expertise that writers are generally known for, being able to flex language that glues an experience together, but then getting out of the way when you want someone to complete a task and making it feel effortless and easy. And then empathy really is about unearthing the soul of a product. At Google, we tend to be generally very clinical and mechanical about the way we communicate things. So it's important for us to kind of step back and really think about how we might best anticipate and solve for our user needs, and even sprinkling in some delight and finding creative solutions in order to do that. And then finally, this strategy piece here is equally important. It's really about staying focused on metrics and other benchmarks of success, in addition to those cross-functional relationships that are so critical to building your product experience. All right, so rapid fire case studies. We just covered Duo for video calling, and now I want to get into an example of a messaging app that I worked on and some of the things that I learned about voice and tone. All right, so this is a screen of one of our marketing pages where we introduced Allo for the first time. This is Google's cross-platform chatting app. And so I'm just going to briefly read it, this promo copy here. Introducing Google Allo, a smart messaging app that helps you say more and do more. express yourself better with stickers, doodles, and huge emojis and text. Allo also brings you the Google Assistant. So one of the interesting challenges for this particular product was that I mentioned earlier that at Google, we tend to have a very standardized and potentially more serious way of communicating. And that means being very clinical, direct, mechanical. But when we were looking at launching Allo, it was really about being empowered on this charter of thinking about playfulness and kind of more of a spirit of fun that is not generally thought of when you think of Google products. So it was an interesting way to figure out how we might push the boundaries, especially when there are so many patterns and standards that are codified to be a little bit more clinical in tone. So one of the ways we started was really trying to guide our voice and tone by coming up with a tagline. So some of the components of the tagline were, how do we want to feel that this product should be perceived as by our users? And so this idea of say more, do more, be more you, we wanted to highlight this expressiveness. We were going to add a lot of features that were very rich visual components that are not necessarily standard across messaging apps. We wanted to also incorporate Google Assistant for the very first time. So this idea of utility built into a messaging app was very new at the time. And so being really focused on this idea of doing more was part of the core messaging. And then finally, it was our overall thesis that when you can say more and do more, you can be more you. So we were, giving it as a challenge to ourselves to be able to produce this product, to be able to help people just live their lives and make it easier and be more them. So interesting thing, wanted to pressure test this tagline across a very, very critical set of our target audience. This target audience happened to be Brazilian millennials. And so what I wanted to do was, after we launched, we then figured out, okay, well, we've got a huge target audience that we didn't necessarily account for across the English translations. When we think about the casual and informal speak that we were aiming towards, well, how does then that translate to the Brazilian market? So at Google, we generally do localization from a one-to-one kind of effort. So that means like one word is then translated to another word in a particular language. But that doesn't really account for a lot of the nuances and context, right? So, and social kind of awareness about certain things that are part of a culture. So this idea of say more, do more, when presented to a series of millennials, we had very interesting insights. So let me go ahead and read Marcelo's. He said, I believe it's just too vague. It doesn't really say much. This is like Wikipedia. Really important insight for us. We were not an encyclopedia, so we did not aligned with that. So it was important for us to know that this was how it would be received by one of our key user sets. And Louisa says, it reminds me of Snapchat because it has all of the special effects like games and everything. Say more and do more is really what Snapchat is about. So while Snapchat in its like youth and spirit may kind of provide us with this halo effect, it was generally very, very distinct from, Allo was very distinct from the feature set that Snapchat was offering. So that was a very interesting and helpful point of view that we really needed to dig into. And then finally, Renata says, I didn't like it. Do more what? Say more what? This doesn't grab my attention at all, and I just don't get it. So again, like some of these taglines that we think are just, very crisp and concise and brilliant in the English language, when we kind of translate that into another subset of different types of parlances, it can be tricky, right? And so this is just really kind of highlighting that piece. And so when we dug in more across, I want to say it was about 40 or so qualitative semi-structured interviews, we found that there were three themes that surfaced when we talked to millennials about just their habits and their around messaging and when they text. And so these buckets of personal, instant, and hyperlocal were these, again, resonant themes. And by personal, we uncovered that most folks in this set of users we're really just talking to, immediate family members, best friends, and not even colleagues, but like just really a close circle of folks. And then because of that, the tone in their messaging tended to be more informal. And then one key piece here was that it was a lot more affectionate. And so I was in Rio de Janeiro. And the one really interesting thing that I noticed when participants would come to the office that we were conducting interviews in, they would kiss the receptionist, with a double kiss. And so that interesting exchange of such intimate contact when, it's a stranger, right? It's like if I go to the dentist office here in Mountain View, I'm not going to do that to the receptionist, right? So just even that understanding of how community means in both a very personal and very public sphere, that in alone was helpful in helping us build out different screens and different messages that would help resonate with this type of audience. The idea of instantaneousness, again, not specific to messaging in general, but this was a theme that kept on coming up. Not specific to a Brazilian audience in general, but this theme kept coming up over and over. This idea of quick load times when sharing video or imagery, the idea of quick replies. So an interesting social expectation that when you text someone that they actually just expect you to reply. And then finally, the quick message delivery, which really spoke to just the network carrier aspect. And then finally, this really, really important piece of being hyper-local. Again, was in Rio de Janeiro, so that it was a beach culture. And this idea of really this regional pride and really thinking about, where you live as very core to your identity was something that was very, very helpful in helping us understand what would be a relevant artifact to help support richer messaging. So for instance, on the bottom here, you see stickers that were part of the collection for Brazilian users, where we've got specific, regional argot that they use themselves. And then, we feature that in, the sticker pack so that someone can use it to customize their conversation. And so some of these elements, we were learning about and we were able to incorporate to make sure that the experience felt a little bit more tailored to the user set. And I just love this quote from Bruno. He said, "I mostly use slang from Rio. Otherwise, I would lose my accent." Again, really appealing to that really core identity of place and belonging, and really figuring out how do we imbue that spirit within an entire product experience, thinking about just language alone. So the main takeaway here with both the Duo case study as well as the Allo case study, right for humans. It's a very basic concept, but a lot of times we can definitely dig deeper and look for opportunities to improve. So things like keep it real, mirror real talk. When we talked about Duo, thinking about how do we leverage offline speak and translate it into a virtual space. Making hyper local, again, with the Brazilian millennials, thinking about the type of informality and the type of language that they use with their social ties. And then figuring out what matters to them, and then is finding a way to then surface it in your product experience. And then really it's about research, right? Talking to the people and having those candid conversations about, again, pain points and stumbling blocks, finding out ways to bridge those gaps. All right, now we're gonna get into AR. So I had the wonderful opportunity to work on Google's vertical of augmented reality called Daydream. And so, the first time I kind of dug into this project, there was a developer site that we were advertising AR Core, which was the development platform for Android, for AR, for the very first time. And so this was going to introduce this platform to developers across the world. And we wanted to make sure that the messaging here gave people a sense of the enormity of this technology. And so this on the right-hand side is a blurb of the text that was given to me and when I first started the project, and it's welcome to AR Core, build a new class of augmented reality apps that integrate the real world with digital objects and content. deployed to over 100 million Android devices. Learn more. And so you get a sense for, you know, the enormity of this project, but I wanted to dig in further and talk to stakeholders to understand what were their perspectives in the requirements of what needed to be communicated on the homepage of this website so that we could appeal to developers to start building these apps. And so these were several of the attributes that people were looking to communicate. This idea of an aspirational tone, exclusivity by way of an insider access, massive reach and scale with Android, this idea of future-looking, action-oriented, and then really a developer-first, not product-first tone. And so in thinking about all of these attributes and how to really distill them and then communicate them in a really crisp fashion, I wanted to do, you know, just a quick revision. And so before, the headline was "Welcome to AR Core." Again, this is putting your product first, front and center, right? And after is a more really action-oriented, future-focused type of headline, which is "Build the Future." On the left-hand side, you see "Build a new class of augmented reality apps." On the right-hand side, you have with AR Core, shape brand new experiences. So then we're bringing in that experiential component that becomes that layer of dimensionality and just real life human experiences that wasn't necessarily conveyed in the original. And then instead of talking about apps, again, really talking about experiences, instead of talking about integrating the real world with digital objects, thinking about what that means for a user in the context of AR, which is really just seamlessly blending the digital and physical worlds. And then instead of this idea of deploying to over 100 million Android devices, which yes, seems enormous at scale, really thinking about what is the broader impact of that? How can that be made more powerful? So it's not just about like making it available on a device, right? It's about really transforming the future of work and play at Android scale. So again, just really kind of zooming out and thinking about the outcome and the impact and how you want to communicate that. And so this was the old version of kind of like the visuals that we used for the site. But in working really closely with my design partners, we were able to then, you know, use these characters from The Wizard of Oz and then superimpose them into real life spaces so that we were a little bit more playful, whimsical. This is a marriage of the copy that's a little bit more aspirational, forward looking with kind of just a playful spirit. And just really thinking about that fun and just giving this idea of an open-ended possibility by way of this example. Okay. Moving on really quickly to social, Google+. All right, so wow, we did not take the social media world by storm. This was a really, really fun product to work on. And it taught me a lot, again, about framing and really distilling the story that many times isn't obvious, right, when you're working on something. So what I have here is the old logo of Google+. And when we were thinking about rebranding and revisiting how we might communicate the new Google+, we were like, well, what is the most important aspect of Google+? So it's not this idea of like peer-to-peer sharing, right? But it's more this idea of subject matter and topical interests. So like we'd roam around the halls of the office and be like, it's an interest-based sharing network. That's what it is. And so like internally, we would just use that to kind of like be that quick definition where someone new joins and they're like, well, what's the new Google Plus about? Oh, it's this interest-based sharing network. So it became this like common kind of mantra and this, you know, this internal tagline that we would use. While I was working on Google Plus, I had this really wonderful opportunity to, again, interview users. And when we were trying to distill kind of the core benefits of the new Google Plus, we wanted to really just hear the voices of superfans. So there was like a small, hard to believe maybe, but a small subset of folks who were very, very passionate, who had hundreds of thousands of followers. So this woman in particular, her name was Sui. She was based out in Singapore, and she was an architect, found herself feeling just really overwhelmed and overworked by long hours and stress, that she decided to turn to photography. And so she started taking pictures, featured her shots on, you know, Google Plus, created, a following there, and just became so good at it that she entered her one of her pieces into an award, and she got a Hasselblad award for her photo. I forget what it was. I want to say it was a nature-based one. She got really, really good and so passionate about sharing this kind of newfound craft that she taught herself, that she then started to organize these offline walks with folks in her neighborhood, and people would connect with her on Google Plus. They'd share stories about kind of like, pro tips on like for amateurs on how to take great photos. And then, we were able to see this offline and online space just traverse and become a merging of sorts. So this like really, really interesting moment was helpful for us to give life into this seemingly just cold tagline, interest-based sharing network. So people like Sweet were helping us to really kind of build out and add color to the vision of what Google Plus could be. And then she said, a new world happened. My life changed when I started taking photos. And that spirit and that sentiment is something that we wanted to make sure that we preserved and carried through when we were talking and promoting the new Google Plus. And then Randy Taylor was another super fan, and he called himself not a photographer, but a climber with a camera. And so he had so many death-defying shots at the top of all these really, really amazing summits. And people would just often comment on how they just love living vicariously through him. And he said there's a couple of times, including one with a helicopter rescue, where I shouldn't have come out alive. So these like real words from people with their grit and their honesty, this was at the heart of what connected our newfound communities to one another. It was the real connective tissue behind sharing. And then finally, there's a gentleman who calls himself Nomad Dimitri. He was a world traveler, but what he decided to really talk about on G Plus and really gathered a huge following on was his cancer diagnosis and his journey through treatment and survival. And so he said, it is a voyage after all, perhaps scarier than others, but with a greater potential for discovery. And I know from the outset that I don't want this to be a solitary journey. And so this idea of togetherness, even when, you've never met anyone a person for the very first time, like face to face, but through a digital space, that meaningfulness is something that we wanted to capture when we were trying to rebrand this product. And so instead of calling it this interest-based sharing network internally, we then wanted to make sure that we were capturing all of that great spirit and that humanness that I just mentioned in the form of the stories. And so we then started to say that, well, the new Google Plus connects people, content, and conversations. And so just even that shift internally in how we were talking about our own product was such a helpful way to open up a new perspective on how we might build upon these stories that were being shared with us by these super fans. And so I bring this to your attention only because, for us at Google, we definitely have a habit of referring to like the user facing and the internal facing, right? But I do find that sometimes there's the burden of that internal facing terminology can cloud our judgment about what is user friendly and what is really benefit oriented. So it's just a really good check for us to like really calibrate whether or not the way that we're talking about it with each other does reflect how it does, how it's viewed in the product outside of our little bubbles in our offices, our homes. And so here, really, this idea is of finding the story both in the AR core as well as the Google Plus examples. Really thinking about how you might make them care, right? So start with the why. A lot of times we've got fancy features and all of these really, really complex things that might help make something more easy, but it's not very clearly articulated. So why should people use your product? And then again, like piggybacking off of that, clarifying that value prop. Is there something really unique that sets your product apart from the masses? If so, then state it. And then really, really leaning on your cross-functional team. There are so many lessons that I've learned where, just having a casual hallway chat with someone who I don't sit next to, like for instance, an engineer or a PM, really thinking about their pain points really helped me understand how I might reevaluate some of my ideas in terms of the language and how we were approaching the story of this rebranding. All right, emerging tech. And what I mean by that is some of these problem spaces that are generally new-ish and are unfamiliar terrain in terms of trying to figure out how to then make these really crazy huge problems a bit more tractable, especially through language. And so I wanted to bring up this kind of like this really draft mock of something that when we were first starting on Allo, we were thinking about how we might integrate a chatbot into an actual messaging conversation between two people. And so this interesting kind of, a lot of privacy concerns and then tone concerns and like this idea of sharing your intimate space with a third party that is digital, but also knows your data. There were a lot of considerations we had to account for. One of them being like even just at the very basic level, the personality of these bots, so-called, right? So the idea of, again, thinking about your offline spaces that you inhabit every day. When we look at a chat bot and kind of the actual componentry involved, there's generally a script, right, of like just words going back and forth between parties. But there's also like these visual components that are available to us, right, as UXers that we can then use to facilitate a conversation in a more natural way. And when we talk about these offline spaces and social norms, we oftentimes lean on maxims of conversation. For instance, Paul Grice, kind of the father of linguistics, he referenced 4 maxims that were central to conversation theory. So quality, quantity, relevance, and manner. So generally just these 4 tenets of really a back and forth conversation, like turn taking, quality being informative and truthful, relevance, staying on topic, manner, really thinking about the clarity and the structure of how you present ideas. And then thinking about how you might apply that to a generally unknown space. So this was a really, really fun exercise to try to figure out what are the principles that we could use, that we could leverage from everyday spaces and everyday, social norms to be able to then create a more convincing and a more realistic exchange with a digital assistant. And then a lot of that was then ported into what we used for the Google Assistant. So the Google Assistant is used across several surfaces, as many of you know. It could be in your car, it could be in a speaker in your home, right? So the idea that this assistant is kind of disembodied and also present in so many different areas of your life, we really need to figure out what are predictable moments and standards and principles that we could lean on to be able to create, again, a very realistic version of interaction and a helpful and a more useful version of an experience that might be unfamiliar to many. And so being able to then kind of compare notes with across the actual industry, we partnered a lot with folks like Airbnb to really think through different use cases and scenarios and then figure out how we can codify these principles. In addition to that, very related was this idea of smart suggestions. So many of you might be familiar with this. So if, for instance, I share a photo of this cute kid, then the recipient, say my best friend, will be looking at this photo and these predictive text chips pop up. Oh, so cute. Love the daisy, or like emoji face. So when we were first piloting photo reply, it was an amazing technology, but at the same time, very clunky in terms of, again, this natural speech. So I remember the first time I saw the prototype, super excited. It was really robust and awesome. It was able to like recognize this Bernese Mountain Dog. But then when I saw the chips underneath, it was a qualifier, like an adjective like cute, and then the actual breed of the dog. It's like cute Bernese Mountain Dog. And, I had to go back to Eng and say, well, people don't actually talk like that in a texting context. We don't really like name drop breeds or species of plants. So this idea of really kind of leveraging editorial finesse on these algorithmic replies was something that we had to work through to be able to create a more, facilitate a more useful and helpful conversation. So again, very fun and always really interesting when you just think about how do you do it in real life and how do you then kind of translate this to a digital space where it might be unfamiliar. And then going back to the AR piece. So, after really promoting it to developers, I worked on several AR apps. And so this is an example of one. And this is a wayfinding app for attendees at I/O. And so essentially, we had this problem of understanding how to invoke guidance in a physical space on a digital form factor, right? So people were going to the conference and there was like points of interest, like where do I find the bathroom? Where do I go get some food to eat? The help desk, for instance, and really figuring out how to trigger that marriage between offline and online spaces. So many different considerations that we had to think through, like new types of interactions, different types of spatial relationships, physical movements, intimate, full body, all these environmental considerations. And we really collaborated with, sound artists and illustrators to define draft and polish guidelines for Google-wide usage, to be able to then carry through those principles to other apps like this, which is what you would find on the search, Google search app, where you can search for great white shark. And then there's a button that allows you to see this shark in your space, and it's a full-size version. So really thinking about, again, these offline moments and how we might be able to bridge them through language was really important. And if left to the devices of very technical folks, not to say that writers are technical, we often tend to over-index on mechanics rather than benefits. So really understanding what's the true value that you're getting out of this and how can you best and most crisply and concisely communicate that in a tiny, tiny button, perhaps. So really, these examples are just to show you really when spaces are unfamiliar and unknown, there is definitely ways to make them tractable, and figuring out how those principles and heuristics might help you set the standard. Really thinking about how to anchor on these principles that are patterns backed by research. Again, really working together with your cross-functional partners to figure out how you might then, create these moments in a more seamless fashion. And then always knowing that the first or the second or the 10th time isn't going to be perfect. Really thinking about how to test these ideas and kind of continuously figure out how you might embody this growth mindset. Always iterating over and over and over to try to get it better the next time. So that was a lot, but in summary, the three things I would love for you to take away with are writing for humans, finding the story, and setting the standard. Writing for humans, really thinking about bridging those online and offline spaces. And when you can, considering ways to hyper-localize or really just making more opportunities for custom content available in your product, if it makes sense. And then really having those ongoing conversations via research, via quant and qual analysis, and really getting a sense of those, both super fans and haters, and really understanding how to bridge the gaps there. And then for finding the story, make them care, really figuring out really what are the pieces that are most valuable. How might you highlight that? Clarifying the value prop, and again, leaning on your partners to help you get there. And then setting the standard, anchoring on principles and these mental models that we're all very familiar with, building those partnerships, and then testing. And I want to leave you with this. The godmother of content strategy, Christina Halverson, said, "Stop pretending content is somebody else's problem. Take up the torch for content strategy, learn it, practice it, promote it. It's time to make content matter." So oftentimes we think of our different disciplines and roles as having like these really, really specific practices. But what I found as a writer is just being like kind of walking the walk, right? Not just saying like, know your users, but I really, really try to strive to understand the point of view of my product partners, my eng partners, my design partners, really understanding, what they're going through and their pain points, trying to bridge that. And then also very much thinking about sharing your learnings from a content perspective and really figuring out ways to then, codify these successes that you will eventually earn together. And that is all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. That was fantastic. We have a number of questions out here, and I'm just going to start popping up on the screen, starting with Chi. He asked, would you say that writing for AR Core was more like marketing writing and less like UX writing?
Oh, that's interesting. No, but, or yes and. Sorry, yes and. This was one of the products where I had to have heavily lean on my marketing partners because for, acquisitional moments when we're promoting the platform and then into the UI, we really wanted to have that connective tissue and to make sure that the touch points were saying the same thing, were meaning the same thing. And so there was a very significant piece of marketing writing that I needed to heavily inform my work and vice versa. And so it was a really very strong collaboration between marketing and UX writing.
Fantastic. And we have a multi-part question and follow-up, so I'll read some of this from the chat for you. This is from the Claude Mitch. I believe that product teams already do their own customer interviews. How can we make sure that UX writing target is aligned with the product target in terms of usage and market expectations? And he follows up with, wants to know if it's worth interviewing customers again, as product people usually do that job. It's more about a process question on how to avoid disconnects between the product and the wording, as both the product and the wording is targeted towards the same audience.
This is a big one, and that's such a good question too, and a really, really hard one. So I would say that for us, we generally lean on our UX research partners who are the experts at conducting interviews to really help us understand these pain points. And so they become kind of like our teachers of and translators of these user needs, right? And so really using them as the headlights of product direction has been, I would say, for my experience across these different verticals, has been the most successful recipe. And I think when product has a very strong opinion and then tends to override kind of terminology that maybe the UX writer feels isn't ideal or useful, oftentimes what I've seen is that, the product out in the wild gets kind of viewed by several people, and then you hear these complaints about whether it's comprehension or clarity or information density because of like some terms that were like forced upon the UI. So I think that some of those like lessons learned when you actually see the product in the wild can help kind of reconcile that disparity and that disconnect. But I definitely would lean on UXR or research to be able to help guide us toward really solving for the user problems.
Great. I wanted to ask a follow-up question with that. What does the process look like to work with researchers to learn about users and to test your messaging?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that it varies for several teams. For my team in general, what we tend to do is during like the kickoff stage of any project, like we try to align on goals. And then even like concept level understandings, like level setting of like concepts that we're using and understanding, like making sure that we all kind of are thinking the same things based on these terms or paradigms. And then really just frequent communication. And so like what'll happen inevitably usually is like, we've got mocks where like there's some language that I feel kind of is not ideal. And so I will, ask if like a researcher has like bandwidth to be able to help me figure out the best method to test this content. And so they'll oftentimes bake in like my questions into a user session that they're already running. And then from there, we can then gather data points to help kind of push us in the right direction.
Fantastic. Mon has a question. How does content strategy work alongside visual design? And they also asked in the chat, how does the message become cohesive with the visuals?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think the only way it can become cohesive is if you work together across from kickoff to launch. And so that's generally, hard, right? Because there's like so many projects and deadlines and volume of work or what have you. But oftentimes, we all have those examples when we work in silos and then you kind of throw it over the fence, whether or not you wanted to, but that's just what happened. And then there is that huge disconnect that happens. And so like just being able to figure out ways where you might communicate frequently and then build in those checkpoints where you can align, diverge, and figure out, like what are the best things that you can do for your piece, and then come back again and converge and like compare notes and like just work alongside each other, I think is the best route.
Fantastic. Pallavi has a question. How do you determine when is the right time to research to improve content that you already have?
How do you determine when is the right time? So I have an example where, I just launched a product on Google Ads. And so we're hearing kind of like early insights from beta users. And so that's actually a wonderful time because you've already got something as like a proof of concept. It's a little bit more baked because it's in kind of a form where people can interact with it. And then you have concrete comments or feedback around what could be more useful or more helpful or what was confusing. And that is really helpful in preventing churn because when, you can go forever and have like 70 million rounds, but unless you actually gather those critical user insights from people who are actually like testing it out, I think it's just so much more useful than just going back to the drawing board, doing it again without that insight.
I wanted to follow up on the Google Plus project. Can you describe your writing process when you're given such an open-ended problem?
Yeah, so we had several projects going on at once for that rebrand, and one of them was a website which featured those superfans that I shared. And so really that was about interviewing the folks, understanding kind of like what their top priorities were what they were looking for Google Plus to achieve for them. And then figuring out like how best to describe, how best to present it on a website, right? And so like, I think because that's more of an acquisitional moment where the user isn't yet bought in to Google Plus, it has to be very aspirational and it has to be very hopeful in terms of like what you can do and also but concrete enough where you give solid examples of how this is what this person did, right? So for that website, it really was the bulk of my work was in interviewing each of these super fans and then figuring out like categories of insights that would help us tell the story. And it was really, again, looking for themes. Like, for instance, for like the Allo Brazilian millennials study that I did, like really looking for what are the things that they're saying over and over and over again, figuring out how we might be able to surface that. That's
great. Pallavi has another question. What tools do you use to collaborate? And I also want to follow up on this one. A lot of people, kind of view writers as, kind of working in a solitary way. I'd like to ask also, in addition to tools, how do writers collaborate?
At Google, we generally, we have content matrices that we share with our partners that would feature like an image of the mock and then the recommendation of the words or the text or string. But we also are in our designers Figma files, and sometimes we're kind of going through and just like for instance, after this call, I'm going to dig into a Figma file and change all the text. So like we'll do that. And a lot of us have found that that real-time collaboration within these tools that our design partners already use has been super helpful and has kind of compressed that time, like that feedback loop time, and is just a little bit more collaborative because everybody is just seeing it all happen in real time. You're not like sending something over and be like, can you review this, please? Like people have access and it's a lot more open and approachable that way. So Figma, Docs, we'll use Google Sheets here and there, but really basic tools, I would say. Slides.
Fantastic. I'm trying to get to another question here. The Clodmic has another question. Have you ever noticed that some messages get somehow less efficient over time?
I'm trying to understand the question.
The Clodmic, if you have a follow-up, post it in chat and I'll read it out to her.
I mean, I could speak to like the freshness of a message in terms of one example I could share is on G+, there was a box where we invited people to share their interests, and we rotated this ghost text that would prompt users to say like, say for instance, it would say like, tell us something about yourself. And then maybe the next month we'd experiment with share something or say what's on your mind. And so it was interesting because we did see that like some strings would resonate with some types of user sets. And that freshness was really important in some sets, but some sets didn't care, right? And some sets didn't even, their behavior was the same no matter what string they saw. So, and Wendy says something about their trendy words. We get a lot of pressure to use. Oh, interesting. Yes. Like industry jargon. I wonder if that's what smart. Yeah. Smart. Yes. Okay. So yes, we have a ton of products at Google, right, that are leaning more towards like AI and ML based products. And so what's interesting is like you put smart in front of something like smartphone and smart something, right? Then it almost dilutes the power and the strength of what smart means. And then it also begs this idea of dumb, right? Like the contrast. It's interesting. Yeah. So being able to flex these monikers and these labels to then still stay current is definitely a challenge for sure.
Yeah. Nothing smart when everything's smart, right?
Yeah.
Kingsley has a really interesting question. How do you impress the importance of good UX copy upon designers and colleagues who aren't keen on including you in the process?
Oh, Kingsley, this is a good one because I always have to elbow my way into meetings. You know, the only way I found is to write really good copy. Like, and so like, even if no one notices, one day they will, because they'll like, people will complain because either like, you know, somebody else wrote it because you weren't there that day or something. But yeah, you know, I've done a lot of these roadshows where you're like, here's my work to partners. Generally they'll like fall asleep or whatever. And it doesn't really help by way of like influencing them to take action and like including. What I've found is that like being able to back up a lot of my recommendations with data and statistics and user insights, like even quotes, has been much more compelling and helpful. And then also really diving into, for instance, like different industry competitors, like in thinking about the landscape and how language is used across that entire landscape, and then giving a really clear rationale as to why you're presenting this particular recommendation. So understanding that like entire space and then figuring out why your recommendation is better. So like those rock solid rationales, and then just really, I would say, elbow your way in. I do all the time, uninvited.
That's awesome. Anita has a question. Is there a sequence to how to get things done, especially between UX writers and visual design? It is certainly collaborative, but are there times when doing one before the other adds more value?
Yeah, I think that there are several times in my career where we did focus very much on content versus design, where, for instance, I was in a couple e-commerce companies where we didn't start building the design until like my copy was submitted or whatever. And so then they would build the design around, or the entire campaign around my words, right? Here at Google, it's kind of the opposite, where like you'll see these really lo-fi mocks where there's a concept that is, you know, being thought through, and then either in tandem or after, the writer gets to kind of like, you know, evaluate and try to figure out what language works best. I think it depends on the product, and it depends on, like, for instance, something like with emerging spaces, like conversation design, definitely words first. But then something like AR, VR, like I definitely had to work closely, and could also be as successful if I saw a design and then had to like think about the language after. So I think it just depends on what you're working on.
Fantastic. She has a question about measurement. What statistics can we gather to test, measure, and justify effectiveness of content?
That is a really good one. So many. And I actually want to invite a colleague to speak to you about this because she's really good. So, you know, you can audit content across an entire product, and then you can think about like readability levels, like Flesch Kincaid, like what are the best practices in terms of like the jargon and the actual words that appear, like is that at an accessible level for someone in, like, I think we generally try to say like 5th grade reading level or below, like on, and so like, for instance, I'm on Google Ads right now, and a lot of the language tends to be technical and jargony, right? So then, you know, really thinking about what are your users and then understanding that reading level. You can also do A/B tests where you have one string and you do one version and another version. You just test them against each other and figure out which one garners more clicks or results. A lot of the qualitative research that I've helped my UX partners with has helped me set the direction for product decisions. And again, that was just simply talking to users about when they're using the product, like kind of if you're having them complete a task, like what are the stumbling blocks or areas of friction along the way that you might help mitigate with content. So those are just some, and I've just like literally just scratched the surface, and I'm not an expert at that. So I definitely will defer you to someone else I have in mind. I might give her name to Erin to invite.
That would be awesome. Always looking for more speakers. I wanted to follow up with, you had talked about legal requirements earlier. You just touched on that. How do UX writers navigate legal requirements when they're imposed on the product and yet still deliver that great experience we're all looking for?
Yeah, it's tough, especially with like enterprise level companies like Google. We generally work very closely with the legal team and are involved in several legal reviews. And a lot of times I, you know, myself included, have walked away defeated because there's so much legalese that is just required, right, by law. And but there are also moments where you just develop this negotiation with the lawyers about like, hey, we can't say this, but can we say this? And it's like almost that delicate dance that you almost just have to engage in over and over to become good at, to then, again, build that relationship with the lawyer for them to understand why you're pushing so hard for a more like maybe user-friendly or approachable piece of content. And yes,
thank you very much.
Educate your lawyers. Yep.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Wendy's helping DJ this in the background, and she is a writer, and she was talking about educating lawyers, and that's part of our job too. It goes both ways. So I wanted to end with a question here. You know, if a UX writer or if a UX designer or visual designer doesn't have a writer on their team, how do they get started when they want to write better experiences?
I would generally lean on this idea of offline language, like what you use in everyday conversational language, and then stress test it with anyone you can, who like falls in line with the personas that you're trying to target, right? Oftentimes, like to make sure that my content is free of any type of tech jargon, I will literally ask my husband, who's a firefighter, because he is not in my field. He'll be like, what is a browser? And I'm like, okay, good to know, like that I need to figure out a more plain language kind of alternative. So, I mean, I would first say, like, you need to hire a writer. It's a requirement, but I know that it's not possible for many people. But I think leveraging offline speak and then just really thinking about ways that you can kind of put that content in front of people and have them react to it and gather their thoughts on it.
Awesome. Thank you, Yvonne. This was a lovely and informative talk. Thank you, everyone, for joining. If you are wanting to attend in January, I encourage you to sign up on Meetup right now to hear Kristen Couture. Thank you, everyone, and have a great holiday season.
Awesome. Bye. Thank you.